Cannabis is less harmful than drinking or smoking cigarettes and should be made legal. That's the findings of the latest reports into its risks. The Beckley Foundation's Global Cannabis Commission says banning the drug has backfired and calls for a serious rethink of drugs policy. The authors of the report say that it's only through a more regulated market that young people can be protected from the stronger forms of dope such as skunk.
Breast cancer kills more than 41,000 American women every year. Researchers in the San Francisco lab are working to shrink that number, and they're doing it with an unusual weapon, marijuana, or at least a compound from it.
What we found is that this compound called cannabidiol was particularly effective at inhibiting aggressive breast cancers.
First, scientists at California Pacific Medical Center discovered a key gene which enables breast cancer to spread. Then they tested the pot compound and realized it could actually inhibit that gene's destructive path and stop the spread of tumor cells, and potentially do it without harming a patient.
We know that this compound extracted from cannabis is non-toxic in patients because it has already been used for different kind of disease.
The benefits may not stop there. Scientists say the cannabis compound may fight other aggressive cancers, including prostate cancer. The next step, animal studies, then clinical trials. So it may be several years before patients may benefit from a cannabis cancer fighter.
I think it's a promising avenue in terms of the treatment for aggressive cancers, and which is really where we need treatments for.
It never ceases to amaze me that anyone shopping for groceries will have the choice to buy hard liquor and cigarettes along with the milk and bread. Not that I have anything against those things, but in the 90s, it was the legal substances of alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceutical drugs that affected my life forever. In 1994, at age 32, my close friend passed away from pancreatic cancer. He had been 5 years sober, religiously attending AA meetings. Although cancer runs in his family, it will always be my opinion that the non-stop chain smoking played a major role in his sickness.
So although 10,000 people died last year from their use of cocaine and heroin, it's estimated that 450,000 died from their use of tobacco.
A few years later, at age 47, my brother Kurt suffered a seizure caused by years and years of taking legal pharmaceutical medications used to control his schizophrenia.
It's estimated that 100,000 people died last year from their use of legal prescription drugs.
My mom, who had battled diabetes for many years, started drinking harder after Kurt's death, and even after surviving an almost complete liver failure, was still unable to quit drinking and lost her life in 2001. And not long after my mom's passing, my dad's drinking finally caught up to him. But luckily for my dad, he told me that the dialysis machine allowed him to drink way more than ever because of how it filtered the alcohol.
It's estimated that 150,000 people died last year from their use of alcohol. And I'm not talking now about drinking and driving. I'm talking about just the health consequence of drinking.
Remove the 20 million or so Americans who use marijuana, and we are left with a drug abuse epidemic involving roughly 2 million regular heroin and cocaine users. A public health problem, to be sure, but serious enough to justify spending $20 billion a year or modifying the Bill of Rights? The demonizing of a plant that less than 20 years ago was on the cusp of general acceptance will surely puzzle historians of the future. They will wonder why it was the drug war of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s that fought the vast majority of its battles over marijuana. They will wonder why, during this period, Americans jailed more of their citizens than any other country in history, and why 1 of every 3 of those were imprisoned because of their involvement with drugs. Nearly 50,000 of them solely for crimes involving marijuana. And they will wonder why Americans would have been willing to give up so many of their hard-won liberties in the fight against this plant. For in the last years of the 20th century, a series of Supreme Court cases and government actions specifically involving marijuana led to a substantial increase in the power of the government at the expense of the Bill of Rights. As a result of the war against cannabis, Americans are demonstrably less free today.
Republican Congressman from Texas, Ron Paul. Also, you know him from the race for president. Congressman, good to see you. As your colleague Barney Frank said, the chances of this thing passing are not high, if you get the joke. What's the aim here if this thing isn't going to pass?
Well, my aim is always to promote freedom and the Constitution, and an issue like this is just has no value to have the federal police going out and trying to find people who might be smoking. Before 1938, the federal government wasn't even involved. So I would think that the states can handle things like this, and the whole notion that we regulate and prosecute people for things that some other people think is a vice, I just don't see any purpose on this. I thought we learned our lesson about what Prohibition did in the early part of the last century. There's no value to it. It wastes a lot of money and causes a lot of trouble. And what do? We end up with laws like this that prohibit sick people from using marijuana where they can get benefit. We literally, the federal government overrides state laws and arrests people who are sick and getting some benefit from marijuana, and they're dying with cancer or AIDS. That makes no sense at all.
Congressman Paul, real quickly though, where does it end? So we legalize about 3.5 ounces of pot, then we say, if you got a touch of crack cocaine, that's okay too.
Well, that isn't the purpose of this piece of legislation, but, for 130 years, that's exactly what happened. When I was a kid in high school selling in a drugstore, I sold cough medicine with codeine in it, and nobody recorded anything. And I never saw one kid in the whole community ever abuse it. So this whole idea that you have to have the federal government make people do the right thing is total nonsense. Yes, it's dangerous, it's risky, but so is alcohol, and so is smoking cigarettes. It's who should do the policing and who should make these choices. And I say it should not be the federal government. It should be the parents and the individuals. And as long as they're not hurting other people, we should allow state regulations to take care of these problems.
Total federal, state, and local spending on the drug war per year minimum is about $50 billion. That's $136 million per day. That's $5 million an hour. That's $95,000 a minute. That's $1,500 a second. To give you all an idea of how much that is, I'm going to time a few minutes while we go do something else. That something else is a little tutorial. I think you all need a lesson in why the drug trade is so effective. So I present the drug war in a nutshell. Here's how it works. Drug mules, many of them women, are recruited in places like Colombia. Then they swallow 60 to 100 latex-wrapped drug pellets, usually cocaine, and sent on an airplane to go into the U.S. Often there are many mules on one plane to increase the chances of at least one or two getting through. In fact, occasionally customs officials will get anonymous tips if there is a mule on the plane, sacrificing one so that the rest can get through. Sometimes the mules only swallow the drugs, but sometimes there are women called triple packers, where they swallow them, shove them up their butt, and also insert them in their... well, you get the idea. And these mules are not bad people most of the time. Often they are pulled in by the allure of making money like they'd never seen before. In Colombia, being paid to be a drug mule can net you a lot of money. If it's $5,000 American, as of August 2005, that's 11.5 million Colombian pesos. That's enough to buy a house. The drug lords are always changing their tactics for how to best get people through. If airport security violated every single privacy consideration and x-rayed every person to come through there, then the drug lords would get a handle on that and find other ways. And for this intricate cat-and-mouse game, what do they have to show for it? According to government survey data, 108.25 million Americans aged 12 or over, 46% of the U.S. population, have used an illicit drug at least once in their lifetimes. 35.1 million Americans aged 12 or over, 14.9% of the U.S. population, had used an illicit drug during the previous year. From 1982 to 2003, 26,819,900 people were arrested on drug-related charges. Of those, 20.3 million were arrested for simple possession. These numbers are increasing exponentially, especially for marijuana. Police arrested an estimated 755,187 persons for marijuana violations in 2003, according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's annual Uniform Crime Report. The total is the highest ever recorded by the FBI and comprised 45% of all drug arrests in the United States. At current rates, a marijuana smoker is arrested every 42 seconds in the America. Of those charged with marijuana violations, 88%, some 662,000 Americans, were charged with possession only. The remaining 92,301 individuals were charged with sale, manufacture, a category that includes all cultivation offenses, even those where the marijuana was being grown for personal or medical use. In past years, approximately 30% of those arrested were aged 19 or younger. In 2001, drug law violators comprised 20.4% of all adults serving time in state prisons, 246,100, and constituted 55% of all federal inmates, 78,501. The cost to house these offenders? According to the ONDCP, federal spending to incarcerate drug offenders totals nearly $3 billion a year. The UN estimates that illegal drugs are 8% of all international trade. To compare, motor vehicles are a mere 5.3%. Obviously, with hundreds of billions of dollars a year spent worldwide on combating the drug war, people are still finding ways to get what they want. And where do you think a lot of this money is going? Murderous drug cartels, terrorist organizations, and very bad people. One would think that if we were to take the drug trade out of the hands of the black market, out of the hands of terrorists, out of the hands of criminals, and made them government-regulated commodities, which is certainly better than government-attacked commodities, countless billions of terrorist dollars would dry up. And for once, our laws would reflect reality, not our perfect vision of what we want the world to be. Okay, that was 4 minutes. In that time, $380,000 was spent on the war on drugs. Is the government making good use of that money? Well, you tell me.